Well, good evening. This is the Randomizer. I'm Charles Schultz, and we're going to be talking about post-industrial tonight. So, a lot of people have heard the term, but they don't know what it is. We're on the verge of a post-industrial society. So, we'll talk about pre-industrial, industrial, and post-industrial so you get a flavor for each. And I think it'll be rather illuminating when you see where it is all going. So, I'm encouraging everyone to go to the universesciencecenter.com or schultzlaboratories.com. Go to our site, walk through our galleries, see what's in there, and send us your suggestions to what you think we should have in our exhibits and our interactive displays. If you have specific subjects you need to teach for a company you work with, for a classroom that you're involved in, for homeschooling, other projects, let us know, and we'll do our best to get that stuff in there in the virtual environment so you have the ability to interact with things in 3D, walk around the galleries and have fun with it. And also, if you are an educator or you have some expertise you wish to share, contact us. We can set you up a classroom or a virtual gallery so you can have people from all over the world see your works and listen to what you have to share with them. So, universesciencecenter.com, schultzlaboratories.com, and also join us every 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on weekdays for the Randomizer, and which is what you're listening to now. Be sure to join us live with your questions, your comments, and any thoughts you have on the subject, any technical question you have. We'll do our best to answer it for you. So let's get into post-industrial. So before the industrial age, what did we do? Everything was pretty much made by artisans or craftsmen in small shops. Think of the blacksmith. A lot of people depended on somebody with skills in metalwork, in leather, hide tanning, fabric working, and in small communities in the past, you really had to have about 20 different families that had numerous different skills, so everything could be produced by their labor and their efforts. And you did a lot of trade. And then when the industrial age came along, everything was revolutionized. Now, what do they mean by industrial age? Well, you can obviously think of things like the onslaught of steam engines, locomotives, the need to make steel rails for the trains, the industry that was necessary to have transportation across a continent and shipping of cargo and goods. Previously, it was all done pretty much by ox carts and whatever you had. And the growth of the rail industry was one of the larger drivers of the steel industry because the rails can't be made out of wood. So, the industrial age is typified by the use of steam engines, industrial power. It started with small things. In the South, in the United States, for example, there was a lot of agriculture, but in the North, there was a lot of industry. And that industry was mostly for making glass, firing ceramics and bricks, making precision tools and parts, and in particular the fabrics industry. So the fabric industry was one of the largest industrial ventures that went on at the time. And the real issue was it took machinery to weave fabric, to card the wool, spin the thread. And so when we talk about the industrial age in the United States, a lot of it centered around things such as and it wasn't fast food, as you might think. A lot of it went around fabrics, metals, specialty tools, blades, saws, drills. All of these things were hand operated. But the industry to do it really took off when we started seeing things like the basic oxygen process, Bessemer converters for making steel. So we went to fabric and then the jacquard loom, the automated loom. And so we had to have steam engines to run industry. And industrial production really depends on a factory environment in many ways. So when you have an automobile being made, and this started early in the 20th century with Henry Ford's venture, the first really large automobile manufacturer, there were metal panels that had to be stamped, and there were castings and forgings that had to be made. And so here is where we really saw the turning point. A consumer product, a vehicle, an engine, tractors, and automotive products were really one of the largest drivers of industrial development. And this sort of fed upon itself because as you had better tools and more innovation, even more advanced tools were invented. So pretty soon we're seeing lathes and milling machines and devices for shaping and fabricating metals. And metals have the advantage of being quite durable, and metal in itself is value. Now, if you stop and think about it, around the year 1000, during the medieval times, whenever there was a battle, at the end of the battle, all of the metal was stripped off of all the bodies of those who fell. And every scrap of metal represented an investment of mining and smelting and the fuel it took to do it, the making of the engine, the ovens. All of this hardware and effort resulted in something that was expensive. So during these times, people didn't realize this, but when you talk about the king's treasurer, you always think of them as keeping the king's gold and silver and maybe even copper because it was a valuable metal as well. In fact, one of the jobs that the king's treasurer had was keeping and maintaining the scrap metal because it was such an expensive and valuable resource. It was the distillation of effort. So metal was wealth. And when the industrial age started, this meant that this sort of wealth was in everybody's hands. All you had to do was work and purchase. You didn't have to know the guy that fabricated the horseshoes or made the nails. They could come from a factory now. And it meant that the cost of these items went way down, which meant it was even more available. So machinery, the industrial machinery, meant that instead of manual labor, we could turn a lot of this over to hardware. And that meant that the processes of shaping and producing and getting it out the door were greatly in the hands of machinery at that time. Now, this was not automated machinery until the 60s and 70s, and industrial automation really became common then. Now, we see that we're going from steam engines to electrical motors, and we're seeing the production of better metal alloys, higher capacities. We're turning out millions of tons of steel from the mills, and we have the capacity to mine coal to fire these engines of industry. And in an industrial society, it reaches the stage where more complicated vehicles and machines are made. Again, stamping and rolling metal parts. This is something it would take months or years to hammer all the panels to make an automobile. Well, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. And it's only when we have huge hydraulic presses, the ability to amplify the force being applied to something, that we understand what the industrial age meant. It meant that many things could be done in factories, and they could be done much faster, much cheaper, and in huge quantities. So the industrial era brought us the world that we have today. One of the things we hear now is post-industrial. What does it mean? We know at this time that almost everything we have, and certainly all of the high-tech items we have, electronics particularly, require specialty hardware that you or I don't own. You have to have specific furnaces that can create ultra-pure crystalline elements such as gallium and selenium, gallium arsenide, selenium crystals, silicon crystals, all sorts of materials that you or I just don't have the capacity to produce. And these crystals and these products of these sorts of industries are then taken another step into, well, the stratosphere of technology. You have to have vacuum systems, coating systems, etching systems, optical systems, laser systems. And the computers and the lasers and the high-tech end are so deeply integrated into what we do. When we think of industry now, most of it ends up being things that a century ago would look like magic. But we reached a stage now where we're finding other ways to make a lot of the products that we use. And a perfect example is a 3D printer. Now, 30 years ago, if you wanted an injection molded or a plastic part, somebody had to design and machine the molds, set them up in a factory, and they had to make the material and blow it in the mold and stamp the pieces out by the millions or whatever. And this meant that you as an individual could not have a custom part unless you had the skill to fabricate plastic items. And a lot of people in the machine shops could do that. They could get a block of plastic or they could vacuum form a part. And this is an interesting one. Vacuum form is one of those things where you have a plate with hundreds of holes or thousands of holes in it, And then you have a mandrel, a shape or an item. And then above it you have a frame with a hinge that can come down, just like closing a window. And in that frame is usually a sheet of plastic. And it's heated with a thermal lamp or a hot air system. And then it is laid over the object you wish to form, and the air is sucked out of the frame, and the plastic sloops down over the form and duplicates the shape of it. Then the mold is opened or the frame is opened, and this piece is taken out and trimmed, and you have a vacuum formed part. They used to sell a tool, actually a toy, to kids in the 1960s and 70s that was a vacuum form maker. And you could take your own sheet of plastic and you could duplicate cars and toys and small pieces with it. But as far as it goes, those sorts of things were not the run of the mill. If you really wanted a nice plastic part, you had to have a mold made. But today, you're not dependent on injection molding. You can buy a 3D printer. And the plastic comes in the form of a spool of line, very similar to weed whacker line. And so what it does is it heats it up in a head and it draws little dots of plastic and lays them down in layers and goes another layer higher, and it builds up the part. And a lot of you have seen this happen. Many of the parts early on were very coarse in shape, a roughness to it that you certainly wouldn't get in a mold. And a lot of people got very clever. They would take these parts, put them in a chamber of solvent vapor, and it would smooth it, run it together. And it was kind of a cheat, but it worked pretty nicely. And so many people had 3D printers and also a little chemical processing bottle where they'd put their solvent fumes in there and smooth out the rough edges of the part. But now they make they make 3D printers for metal components, for ceramic, sometimes for glass material. You can actually have a pottery blank or a leather stage piece of pottery printed on a 3D printer. You can finish it up as you will and fire it and get the finished product. So 3D printing is, in some people's minds, the end of the industrial era. Because as we refine our technology, we reach a stage where you can make nearly anything with 5 or 6 different types of 3D printing machines. But what happens to the factories that make all of the original stuff, like pipe and tubing and steel pieces and I-beams? Well, some of that industry is going to persist for quite some while. But for many of the consumer items, you'll find that there are more and more niche products coming out, and then an expansion to the point where they can produce more general items. And pretty soon, we end up with sort of 2 or 3 boxes that can make everything. One of them is turning out foods and medications, and another one is turning out plastic items, and another is turning out electronic parts. And so when you integrate all of these things together, you can imagine some sort of super call it a replicator machine like they have in Star Trek. A machine that can make anything you can think of. The technology to do that is almost here. It's called nanotechnology. In the very near term, we're expecting simple nanotechnology, devices that are literally like microscopic robots that can grow any part you want. At some point, what factories do, industrial centers do, is going to start shrinking. It's going to start dying away. And after a while, no matter what you want, the go-to technology may be 3D printing and nanotechnology, or maybe just nanotechnology. So a post-industrial world is one where we no longer have monstrous factories churning out immense products. It takes giant trucks and vehicles to move around. We might simply send them the blueprint over the net, and their machine will churn out whatever they need. And so a post-industrial world is one of 2 flavors. One, we have ascended to the age of nanotech and specialty printing, where anything can be manufactured on demand, or 2, everything falls and we're back to the Stone Age. So either one could be considered a post-industrial world. And the one I would preserve is the one that has all of our knowledge and technology and the ability to live very well. I mean, what's the point of just surviving when you can survive with style? So what I would say is we are headed for a post-industrial society, one where most of the factories will be vanishing within the next 10 to 15 years, if not sooner, and almost everything can be made at home or at a stretch at a community center. So that would be a post-industrial society where, well, manufacturing of primary goods would come right back to the hands of the individual consumer or user. And that's actually a very pretty world in many ways. So somebody says, well, who makes the 3D printers and the nano? Well, actually, we've already got some 3D printers that can make their own parts so that you can start making other 3D printers. And the RepRap, which is an early self-hobbyist made sort of 3D printing or fabricating machine, is well on its way to becoming the first von Neumann general machine. Think of that as the equivalent of plant life, only done in the robotics regime or the Silicon Life regime. Imagine a thing like a seed that you literally can throw onto the surface of a planet and stand back and watch your wristwatch as it begins growing a factory that makes everything. And then you get the idea of what a post-industrial world would truly be like. So imagine you want to go somewhere out on another planet, there's nowhere there to land or do anything, so you shoot a package ahead of you like a seed, and it grows a whole colony with industries and, well, places to stay, food to eat, things to see. That's kind of, in a rough sense, the dream of what the von Neumann machine, the industrial technology of the future, would be like. And that is a post-industrial society. Everything you have can be grown at home. So if anybody wants to post any questions live on the air, you can do that. You can submit your questions by joining us or sending them in by an email. And in the meantime, we're going to go back over an old subject, classes. We're starting robotics classes here at Schultz Laboratories. And we're going to have live participants. We'll be able to support up to a dozen students at a time. We're going to post all of this online. You have a chance to come down here to Schultz Labs itself and see what it is we're doing and get hands-on experience taking our robotics courses. We'll have 3 different courses, a beginner's, an intermediate, and an expert course, and we're going to cover all different aspects of robotics and programming robots, systems that perceive and learn and do things. And if you want to get interested in robotics, the best way to do it is by somebody who's built a lot of robots and has a lot of fun showing you how to do it. At least that's just my opinion. So I would invite everybody to go to our site and have a look at our posts for our live robotics courses, which will be starting here in northern Florida in the area of Lanark Village very shortly. Also, we're going to start our lessons, our online courses again very shortly. The posting will be up on the site. Go to it, read it, and see if you're ready to participate. Now, okay, a question has come in, and it says, what is the technology of nanotech? What is the origin and how? Okay, that's a great one. The first person to describe nanotechnology, particularly formally, it was actually one of those wild professors that everybody used to love, and Richard Feynman was his name. And Richard Feynman wrote an article and taught a course on this called There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom. And he described how there was an awful lot of space from the size of us down to the size of molecules, and that if you could encode information in molecules, that you could take the entire Library of Congress and print it thousands of times on the head of a pin. And so he was very early on in taking that concept and describing it. And the term nanotechnology comes from the scale nano, which means 1 times 10 to the 9th. If you look at orders of magnitude, scientific notation as it's often called, if you go down from 1 to 1,000th, it's called milli. So a millisecond is 1,000th of a second. A millimeter is 1,000th of a meter. If you go down twice that range to 10 to the minus 6th, you're down to 1,000th of a thousandth or 1,000,000th, and that would be a micro. So microwaves are very tiny radio waves, and 1 micrometer or 1 micron is a millionth of a meter. You're still not far enough down yet. If you go down a third stage of 3 orders of magnitude, 1,000th, 1 millionth, 1 billionth, that's the nanoscale, and 1 nanometer is 1 billionth of a meter. And a nanometer is so small that 10 hydrogen atoms side by side would be just about 1 nanometer in length. So the nanoscale relates to the size of the components. And when we're talking about a nanometer, that's about the size that nanotechnology components would be. We're literally working with molecules and atoms and in the terms of tools, almost like robots. And right now, some protein molecules, metal compounds, other things like that are being put together to make machinery that can do things at the scale of the nanometer. And so that's where nanotechnology as a term comes from, and that's where the description of it came from, Richard Feynman. So I hope that's a good answer for your question. And we do expect to see a lot of things on that scale being done in the very near future. In fact, we already have systems that can take a plate of material like a metal or a piece of glass and etch it with a specific pattern with laser light that makes it super hydrophobic so that droplets of water are suspended on the surface and cannot wet the material. Now look up hydrophobic materials. I saw a fellow who has a chemical that makes a hydrophobic coating, and he coated a drinking straw with it. And then he dips it in water, caps the straw and picks it up, and the water will not stay in the straw, it all runs out. So it has some counterintuitive properties. It's kind of like Scotch guarding your shoes and watching all the moisture come off. Nano coatings can repel liquids or make other liquids stick to them more abundantly. So that's an interesting thought. Now, here's another one. It says, please explain if the world is evolving out or in the post-industrial. Let me call up this little text. Here we go. What will the currency and exchange in the world be? And there's another couple of questions there. Okay, so we're leaving the industrial world as we picture it and going to a nanotech world. And it may be a few years before really widespread use is done, but a lot of it is already being worked on at this time. Right now, most of it is in coatings and new materials. And the ability to shape a material using individual waves of light to organize the particles or electrostatic properties or quantum dots, any of these things are the beginnings of true nanotechnology, and we're at that stage right now. So we're leaving the industrial world and going to a post-industrial world because of 3D printing and because of the coming nanotechnology, which, as I mentioned, could make anything. Here's the other one. What will the currency of exchange in the world be? I would say that that's a difficult one to predict because people sure love valuable metals, platinum and gold. After all, it's something you can't effectively make very well, and they have some intrinsic value of their own. In a truly industrial world or technical world, gold would be more valuable as an electrical conductor and a coating material and as a catalyst than as a measure of exchange, a unit of exchange. However, we are actually going to a sort of a weird place right now with NFTs. And what these are, using something called blockchain, which is an accountability system that allows you to see every transaction locked in. And using blockchain, it's possible to track exchanges from the originator to the next owner to the next person. And people are now creating a sort of an intellectual property boom in NFTs, or non-fungible tokens. And a lot of this is in the field of art right now. There appears to be a bit of an upset going on in that right now, but for some people, they have become a sort of a currency. So in a sense, art and information are becoming a crude currency at this time. And the final question was, would other civilizations evolve in similar ways? Well, you know what? Probably, because physics is the way it is. But one thing we can't account for is the psychology of an alien race. It was often said years ago that nobody could understand aliens because, well, they're alien. Maybe. But there are going to be some things related to survival and physics and other similar things that are going to be common to any race anywhere. So I think that it would be difficult to say for sure. I think, and this is just an opinion, because of the rules of physics and the way our psychology works, we're probably going to find a lot of races that work in the same manner, but some will absolutely pull the rug out from under our assumptions, and we won't understand them because of the way we think. We're in a stage where we need to step above the type of human thinking we have. A lot of it is based in conflict and confrontation and perception rather than reality. So it isn't until we can change our perceptions that we become a little wiser and able to deal with totally alien species. But we're also going to find a lot of things that are just plain common sense. And unfortunately, that isn't a method of currency in our world. Common sense just hasn't been that popular. So with that, I thank everybody for the questions. They've been good questions, and it's always fun to talk about these things. And I'm going to read my quote for the day, and that is, "The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. If I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly." And that's John 10:10. So think about that. Nobody breaks into an empty house. Look, they're looking for something. And so it's something to consider. You must have some value if somebody's hounding you for some reason, if somebody's after you for something. You must have some internal value. And that's one of the things you should consider. You're worth something, always. Everybody is. Well, thank you again for coming to the Randomizer. And it's been a fun evening and an interesting discussion. And I thank everybody for the questions. And we're going to have the Randomizer again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to pick another random term out of the hat. And it'll be just as much fun as this one, if not more so. I hope you've learned something about post-industrial society and what it could be and what it means. And I thank everybody who's supporting us and has made contributions. And I hope that you'll go to schultzlaboratories.com or universesciencecenter.com, become a member, and support our growth. And meanwhile, have a wonderful evening and make the world a better place. Thank you. I'm Charles Schultz, and it's been a pleasure. Have a great evening.